Thank you everyone for coming to the presentation on Unit 6, the firm, owners, managers and employees. This presentation will be split into 6 parts. Introduction, firms, owners and managers, employees, the labor discipline model and the principal agent models. So the introduction, where we outline the context and the relevant economic concepts for this unit. So the context, work is an important part of economics. Labor is one of the factors of production and contributes value to the economy. In models of economic interactions, bargaining determines the division of social surplus. All parties gain from these interactions, but have conflicting interests over how these gains are shared. So companies and employees have different goals. The the employees want high wages and um, good working conditions, whereas firms want lower costs and higher output from their workers. So they have to meet in between in order for both parties to benefit from this decision. So we're going to find out how wages are determined within firms and what are the economy-wide effects of firm interactions. We'll also analyze how firms differ from markets, how we will use a model of interactions within the firm to explain how wages are determined and how this influences unemployment, and we will explore the problem of incomplete contracts and hidden actions. So, from the perspective of firms, firm is a business organization which employs people, purchases inputs to produce market goods and services, and sets prices greater than the cost of production. In a free market economy, the principal aim of a firm is to maximize its profits for shareholders. So they need to lower their cost of production and increase their revenue. So the firm is described as in a capitalist economy as a miniature, privately owned, centrally planned economy. So a centrally planned economy is one where a few people make decisions, they set prices, they decide how much they're willing to order. And unlike free market economies where it is the consumers that decide that, in firms there is a small number of people who make all the decisions for the company, the costs, etc. So can be described as a small version of a centrally planned economy, and a firm has to be privately owned. Um, so firms versus markets. In the capitalist economy, the division of labor is coordinated in 2 ways: firms and markets. Coordination within firms differs from coordination via markets. So, as I described previously, the concentration of economic power in the hands of the owners and managers allow them to issue commands to workers. In markets, however, power is decentralized, so decisions are autonomous and voluntary. So what that means is in markets, many people have that power. There is not a small concentration of managers who decide that. And the decisions that are made by consumers, they're usually willing to spend that money because of their perceived benefits, which is contrary to what the firms are about. So this is a basic structure of a firm. So the owners, often the shareholders, decide on long-term strategy, and the managers implement the decisions by assigning tasks to workers and monitoring them. So the people who make the decisions are often not the ones who order to carry them out. So contracts. Firms and markets differ in the contracts that form the basis of exchange. A contract is defined as a legal document or understanding that specifies a set of actions that parties to the contract must undertake. So contracts in free markets is different to contracts in labor. So contracts for products sold in markets permanently transfer ownership of the good from the seller to the buyer, whereas contracts for labor temporarily transfer authority over a person's activities from the employee to the manager or owner. So contracts are often time limited, so you can only keep someone for a couple of years. They often specify how many hours a week you are allowed to make them work, their vacations, etc. So you do not get ownership of that person. You simply get a portion of their time as specified. So relationships within a firm. Unlike in markets, relationships within a firm may extend over a long period of time, which creates network of colleagues and the acquisition of skills necessary for the jobs. These skills, networks, and friendships are firm-specific assets, which means they're valuable only while the worker remains employed in a particular firm. When the relationship ends, value is lost to both sides. So having skills and network of colleagues, having friendship, increase your productivity within that firm. So both you benefit from having a higher output, perhaps getting a promotion, and the firm benefits because you have a higher output, you're more efficient. But however, when you leave that company, you lose that network and you lose often skills that you needed for the previous job. So it is a lose lose situation. So we'll now look from the perspective of owners and managers. Um, as I briefly mentioned previously, the separation of ownership and control is important to understand, um, in that managers do not equal owners. Um, so when in the separation of ownership and control, managers decide on the use of other people's funds. So owners put their money into shares of the company, but they don't carry out the decisions. That money is being used by managers in ways that owners devise. Um, and however, that leads to the problem of asymmetric information. Um, you can see on this diagram that the dashed upward green arrows represent a problem of asymmetric information between levels in the firm's hierarchy, and the owners and managers do not always know what their subordinates know or do, and not all of their directions to commands are necessarily carried out. So normal workers usually don't report to the owners of the company, since their work is being controlled by the manager, and often there is a loss of information, and that can lead to problems within the firm. This separation of power and control also leads to a conflict of interest between owners and managers. So the profits legally belong to the people who owns the firm's assets or shares, and while the manager's actions have impacts on profits, but if profits increase thanks to managers' work, they will not automatically benefit because they have a wage, they have a constant wage, and they will not take a share of the increase in the price of the assets. And this creates conflicts of interest between managers and owners. And this can be solved in a variety of ways. To solve the conflicts of interest between managers and owners, um, the owners can link the manager's pay to the performance of the company's share price. So almost always, CEOs will have a clause in their contracts that includes bonuses, that will mean that if the company's share price reaches a certain point, they get higher pay, or if certain goals are reached within that year, and that motivates the managers to work harder. Or they can also monitor the manager's performance and say fire them um, if the performance is inadequate. Uh, Another option, not listed here, is to give managers shares, and that is what firms often do. They will give the manager a large sum of shares so that they have the incentive to make those shares more expensive. They work harder, and it both increases the value of shares for owners and it also motivates managers. We'll now look from the perspective of employees. Um, so we have this problem of incomplete contracts when hiring employees, because it is different from buying other goods and services. When you buy goods and services, you know what you're getting most of the time. You know your perceived value to it, and you're willing to pay that money. However, the contract between a firm and its employees is incomplete, meaning that some tasks depend on future events, and some aspects of the job are difficult to measure and base wages on, e.g., effort. So, an incomplete contract does not specify in an enforceable way every aspect of the exchange that affects the interests of parties. Um, that is a problem with when setting wages because you cannot know how hard that employee is going to work, how much he's going to provide. You sort of gamble on it, and that can lead to problems during negotiations. So it can be solved through piece rate pay. So it's type of employment in which the worker is paid a fixed amount for each product made. So it gives an incentive to exert effort. However, they are rarely used in most of today's firms since it is difficult to measure outputs in modern jobs, and employees often work as part of a team. In addition to this, um, piece rate pay it's very stressful because you don't have a guaranteed pay, and it only depends on how much you work, which can lead to people overworking, decreasing their productivity, and it could be a loss to the firms as well as the people. So it's not often utilized in developed countries. So if firms can't directly measure effort, why do workers work hard? Well, there are several reasons. One is work ethic, feelings of responsibility, and to reciprocate a feeling of gratitude for good working conditions. So these are things that employers look for in their employees when hiring them, uh, because these are subjective things and you can't tell them before hiring them. But they would look for signs of work ethic so that they work hard, even if they don't gain anything out of it. However, there are things that employers can do to incentivize working hard, which are benefits from measurable output, promotions, or fear of being fired. So employment rents is an important concept here. When employees fear getting fired, uh, the employees fear getting fired when they're paid more than their reservation option. So the reservation option is the next best opportunity. So it can either be another job that you can take if you get fired from this one, or unemployment benefits. So if you're paid over that, then you receive employment rent and you have an incentive to continue working and not get fired. So the employment rent is the cost of job loss, which includes lost income while searching for a job, costs required to start a new job, for example, relocation, loss of non-wage benefits, and social costs. So the equation for employment rate rent is wage minus reservation wage minus disutility of effort. So the reservation wage is the value of the next best option, as I just explained. So it's another type of employment or unemployment benefits. The disutility of effort is how much you perceive your time to be worth while you're unemployed. So we can see from the diagram on the right that the unemployment benefits that Maria would receive if she got fired is $6 as long as she continues looking for a job. However, the fact that she has all that free time to do whatever she wants to her is worth another $2. So her employment rent is actually $4 and not $6. So we'll now look at the labor discipline model. The employer cannot directly measure the worker's effort often, and which is why a large employment rent and the large cost of job loss means that workers put in more effort to reduce their chance of getting fired. And one way to increase the cost of job loss is for the firm to raise wages. Other ways can be sort of decreasing perhaps the wages they receive at another job by price and bad recommendation, etc. So reducing their reservation wage so they have the incentive to continue working at that job, although it may be unethical. So the employment game uh, is step one is the employer chooses a wage. As long as the worker works hard enough, she will keep her job at the offered wage. And the worker, on their part, choose the level of work effort, taking into account the cost of losing a job if she does not provide enough effort. So the employment rent comes into play here. So the trade-offs that they have to make. For the firm, the profit is the worker's output minus wage. So they either want to maximize the worker's output, which can be done through increasing their wages, or they can decrease their wages. So again, you have to strike a balance here in order to get the maximum profit. And for the worker, the benefit that they get from keeping that job and working hard is the employment rent, and they have to decide whether that's large enough to be worth their efforts that they're required to put in. So this is the worker's best response curve. So this from the point of view of the employee, and it shows the optimal amount of effort workers will exert for each wage offered. And so you see that workers, if paid harder, we assume that they're more motivated to keep that job, to work harder, and so they exert more effort. And so um, there, for example, here you can see below $6, they're not willing to exert any effort because they will receive $6 from being on unemployment benefits, and so there is no point in them working for that wage. And the slope is the marginal rate of transformation of wages into effort, which is something for firms to consider. So it's the change in effort per change in wage the firms have to pay. So what is the firm's best response here? To maximize profits, firms want to minimize the cost of production. Uh, However, because there's a trade-off between wages and effort, the employer should find a feasible combination of effort and wage that minimize the costs per unit of effort. So the cost of effort is the same line at all points at an ice cost line. So we can see that the slope of the ice cost line is the marginal rate of substitution. So it's the rate at which the employer is willing to increase wages to get higher effort. As we can see that um, the lower line, the employer has to pay higher wages for the worker to put in the same effort. So the employer is ideally wants as steep a line as possible, so they can pay as little wages for as much effort as possible. And ultimately, the employer doesn't care where on that line, on those straight lines, where the worker stands, because they pay the same amount of dollars for the effort they put in. So their efficiency is equal on every point on those lines. And how wages determined, given those two curves, so from the perspective of the employer and from the perspective of the employee. So profit to maximize the steeper slice cost line, subject to the worker's best response curve, and the efficiency wage are wages set higher than the reservation wage. So workers will care about losing the job and provide more effort. This is again linked um, to employment rents. And we can see here the point where the MRS from the, so this is from the firm's perspective, equals the MRT from the employee's perspective meet each other, is where the wage is set and where the work, how much effort the worker exerts. So involuntary unemployment is being out of work but preferring to have a job with the wages and working conditions that otherwise identical employed workers have. So there must be always involuntary unemployment in the labor discipline model. Why? Because in equilibrium, both wages and involuntary unemployment have to be high enough to ensure employment rent is high enough for workers to put in effort. What that essentially means is that workers have to know that if they don't work hard enough, they will lose their jobs. Whereas if there is no involuntary unemployment, the workers have no incentive to work hard because they know that no one's getting fired, no one's unemployed in the economy, and they will just find another job. So this structural unemployment that um, has to be in place in order for the labor discipline model to work. There are many factors that can shift the equilibrium, and looking from the best response function, so from the point of view of the employee again, it will shift in reaction to changes in the utility of the things that the wage can buy. So if even if your wage is high, you can't buy that much stuff for that amount of money. You don't have much motivation to work harder, and you won't exert as much effort per wage that you're offered. So this utility of effort, how much how much you perceive your leisure time to be worth outside of work. The reservation wage, if another job, if you know that at another job you'll get the same wage as you are at this job, you will not be motivated to work hard because you have no fear of being fired, and the probability of getting fired at each effort level. So if you know that you're close to being fired, you will exert more effort um, per amount of money you're paid in order to ensure that you keep your job. So cooperatives is a concept that perhaps fixes the problem of managers, owners, and workers having different um, goals. So cooperative is a firm that is mostly or entirely owned by its workers, who hire and fire the managers. And because profits are paid out to workers, there is less need for supervision and monitoring. John Lewis is a famous example where workers actually own shares of the company and control that company. So not only are they motivated to work hard in order to increase that share price, but also they don't need to be monitored because managers know that these workers are working hard to um, because they have an incentive. And finally, the principal agent models. So incomplete contracts do not only occur in employment relationships. Incomplete contracts arise when information is not verifiable, the relationship covers period of time, there is uncertainty, there are difficulties with measurement, the judiciary is absent, or there are preferences for omitting some information. So, for example, if you buy products online from a website that's not trustworthy, you don't know whether you are going to get that benefit, and so that can be considered an incomplete contract because you don't know what you're getting yourself in for, how much benefit you're going to get from that product, and so most likely you're not willing to pay as much money for that um, for that product as you would if you knew what you were getting yourself into for. So the principal agent models capture interactions under incomplete contracts. For example, when the firm is the principal and the worker is the agent, and the agent takes action that is hidden from the principal, which is why the principal cannot verify it. In the case of workers, the workers can hide or they can't show their work ethic, how much they're willing to work, what their output is before the firm hires it. That is almost impossible for the principal to verify. Um, so it is considered an incomplete contract. Um, a hidden action problem occurs when there is a conflict of interest between the principal and the agent, as in this case, workers again want higher wages, better working conditions. Firms want ideally lower wages and higher output from workers. So there is a conflict of interest. Um, a, a hidden action problem occurs when so there's a conflict of interest over some action that may be taken by the agent, and this action cannot be subjected to a complete contract. The information about the action may be either asymmetric, so one party knows more than the other. Some of the information is not conveyed, or unverifiable. So you may state that you have a very good work ethic and you're going to provide value to the firm, but the employer doesn't know that and they can't take you up on your word because they can't verify it. So in summary, in firms, owners and managers have power over workers, usually. Contracts are incomplete, so not all of the terms are known, and they do not cover worker effort. Employment rents serve to motivate workers to exert effort. An example of a hidden action problem between a principal firm and an agent worker. So the worker can lie to their employer, a potential employer, about how much they're going to work. And the labor discipline model of wage setting within firms, the ice curves, they call the firm's indifference curves because the firm doesn't care where along that straight line the worker works, as I explained, effort because they get the same amounts of effort per unit they put in. The best response curve, that's from employees, so they get maximum feasible effort given wages, and profit maximizing choice, where the needs of the firm meets the where the needs of the person meets the amount that the firm's willing to pay. And involuntary unemployment is a feature of the equilibrium that is necessary for this labor discipline model to function. In the next unit, we will cover the models of interactions between firms and customers, how the gains from trade are divided between consumers and owners of the firm, and the effects of taxes and firm competition on prices and purchases. Thank you everyone for listening to this presentation.